Wednesday this week, the Supreme Court handed down a judgment in a case brought by a group of unionist politicians, including my good self. The court ruled that the protocol had been made lawfully, but provided much-needed clarity around how the protocol had modified the Act of Union and the Northern Ireland Act, which gives effect to the Belfast Agreement. Now, this all comes at a time when negotiations continue between the United Kingdom and the European Union. Joining me now to discuss the latest developments is Roderick Crawford. He's a senior research fellow at the think tank Policy Exchange. Roderick, first of all, I'm going to ask you for your reaction to the court case and where does it take us in terms of finding a solution?
Well, I'm not surprised at the result of the court case. Courts have constantly ruled in favour of the government and it's empowered to... Parliament is sovereign, it can do what it wants and so forth and so on. So I think in one sense it's the end of the road, I think, for that sort of action for unionists, the legal course. Yeah. I think the concentration's got to go back onto politics for unionists. We're currently obviously in several months down the line on a series of negotiations with the European Union. And those have mostly been technical so far. Those technical negotiations are mostly designed to arrange mechanisms to avoid threats to the European Union's single market. That allows more flexibility for the arrangements that the protocol puts in place. I think where those negotiations have got to go is that they're going to have to go to a political level, because there is only a certain amount of flexibility the technical teams can possibly have operating within the mandate that the European Union has, imagines that it has. Now, I've just published a big report for Policy Exchange on this, and it's my second report for them. And what's interesting is if you go back to the origins of the protocol, the original legal mandate to the European Commission from the Council, that's the member states, was that nothing in the withdrawal agreement could undermine the commitments, the objectives and commitments of the Good Friday Agreement. Now, their understanding of the Good Friday Agreement was one that was rather sold to them by the Irish government. And one of their leading officials described it as the Irish interpretation. And this, of course, stressed north-south elements of the Good Friday Agreement. So the Council, the North-South Council of Ministers, Ministerial Council, and so forth. So that's what the protocol, from the European Union's perspective, had to protect. But it commits, interestingly, to protect the Good Friday Agreement in all its dimensions, and that's very specific language. And the Good Friday Agreement, of course, is much wider than North-South. It's also East-West, or perhaps better to say Northern Ireland, Great Britain, or UK dimension. And that's a much bigger dimension. In terms of... And
constitutionally a very important dimension, of course.
It's the constitutional reality of Northern Ireland, and that's what the Belfast Agreement, Good Friday Agreement, actually guarantees.
So I often think that perhaps either the Belfast Agreement was misrepresented to the European Union or misunderstood by the European Union, or possibly both. Because, of course, the Belfast Agreement is very clear that the Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom until such times... Fully part until such times as the people of Northern Ireland decide otherwise.
Exactly so.
And this protocol, of course, goes into the middle of that, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. So it imposes all these checks on trade between the UK, within the UK, between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And that, of course, is operationally it's very difficult. It's logistical nightmare. I mean, it's interesting that the European Union designed this protocol to operate. You remember Barnier's expression that any solution had to be operational and it had to be legal. And as it turned out, this protocol wasn't operational. If you implement it fully, it just breaks down.
Sometimes I think what we're witnessing is the clash between legality, which the European Union are very keen on. As we know, they're very much into their legal framework, and politics, real politics. Would you say that that's a good characterisation?
Correct, but I think also there are interconnections. So the European Union's mandate is that nothing can undermine the commitments and objectives of the Good Friday Agreement. Now, the protocol, which is their solution to this, actually does undermine the Good Friday Agreement. And they, I think, are under the misapprehension, bizarrely, that the Good Friday Agreement's achievement was to create no hard border on the island of Ireland. Now, that was the completion of the single European market in 1992. The Good Friday Agreement's great objective was to create a constitutional consensus in Northern Ireland about its governance, power sharing, devolved government, and the operation of the consent principle on the constitutional question.
Yeah.
So that's the genius of the Good Friday Agreement. And there are some additional factors like North-South cooperation that are important, of course. Now, when we see the collapse of the institutions, which happened in February, we see a manifestation of the collapse of that constitutional consensus. This court action is a sign of the collapse of the constitutional consensus. Unionists are in court decrying what's happened, and you know that is all a sign that the main objective of the Good Friday Agreement has been undermined by the protocol. Yeah. Now that's an irony. But I think that the European Union has got some recognition of this, but I think it's still also in denial. I mean, it's an inconvenient truth to find that its great solution has become the great problem.
Yeah. Well, Roderick, I mean, I think we talk about people misrepresenting the Belfast Agreement, but surely it's up to our diplomats to make sure that they understand the Belfast Agreement and that it actually, what they're doing is interfering with that Belfast Agreement. But Roderick, thank you for coming in
Thank you.
And explaining that in such simple terms.